Hey, this is Justin Halpern, author of Shit My Dad Says, and you are listening to the Disturbing the Peace podcast. I will give one listener a copy of the book, so keep listening.
This is the Disturbing the Peace podcast with your hosts, Justin Lanero and Reuben Stanford.
Hello and welcome to the Disturbing the Peace podcast. I'm your host, Justin Lanero, on Twitter at Justin Lanero, along with my co-host, Mr. Reuben Stanford, on Twitter at Real Sports Porn, and our executive producer is on the line this evening, Mr. Mitchell Hurd. Mr. Stanford.
Yes, sir.
Episode 5. What is good in Brooklyn, New York this evening, sir?
So good. Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to rock. Feeling good. Nice energy.
Good. Well, right out the gates, we have 3 topics we're going to go over this evening. We're going to have a tribute to Biggie. We're going to talk a little about the opioid epidemic and crisis in this country. And we're going to have a friend of mine on who is suffering from multiple sclerosis. So educational show, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But first, we'll dive right into what's breaking.
All right, thank you, Justin. Today on What's Breaking, we're talking about something that's hot in the news right now, and that's this Paul Manafort sentencing. Basically, he was convicted of financial fraud and sentenced to 47 months in prison. Although this sentence is in line with many cases before this one, which have set the precedent, many people feel that this sentence is extremely light, especially given that the prosecution was looking for something in the ballpark of 19 to 25 years. He's set to face sentencing for other crimes this week, and he'll face up to 10 years for those, and many think he'll get all or most of those 10 years. But the big question for now is, how did he manage to only get 47 months for the financial fraud stuff? Reuben, how do we feel about this?
I have a kind of subdued reaction to it because of it's something that we've seen in the community a lot. I recently looked at a political cartoon by Right-Handed Lefty, and I mean, the cartoon kind of embodies what I feel about the Paul Manafort case, which is a white man plus a white judge plus white collar plus white privilege equals 47 months. It's basically a slap on the wrist. And if you really want to know how people in the community feel, and especially in my Bed-Stuy community and people that live in the urban inner cities, if you Google Kalief Browder, you will understand that there is a simmering mistrust for the justice system. And you will clearly see that there's racial disparity. So I'm just not surprised. I have no sympathy for Paul Manafort, but I do recognize that justice in America has a price. And if you got the right money or you have the right complexion for protection, anything is possible. You could dodge a 24-year sentence that was recommended to the court and end up with 3 years.
Let me say this. I give no fucks about Paul Manafort or anybody in this carnival that we would call a presidential administration. Tax evasion, bank fraud, all this nonsense that we've been hearing about. It's like the whole team has gone down. And he's just another bozo on the bus as far as I'm concerned. Here's this far right-wing guy. Historically, he's been cleaned up and really well dressed, but it's just like you said, Reuben. I couldn't agree more. It's another testament of there's a lot of privilege here. He's got money, and the fact of the matter is, the 3 of us would be getting at least 10 years. So, but that's politics, and in my opinion, politics are bullshit. And this is another. However, I guess he is going to get sentenced in D.C. So he's going to be looking at more than 4 years, and he's pushing 70. So this is a guy that, he could die in prison in 4 years. Even 4 years.
When you've been eating well and you've been taking care of yourself, or you have the right, health care. True. 70 is a young man still. That's still a relatively young man.
This guy looks like the goalie for the dart team, though. I mean, he's not, black don't crack. He doesn't look like you gentlemen, but I mean, he looks like he's, from what I gather from Paul Manafort, he's a little beat up, and who wouldn't be beat up? You're part of this Trump circus. I mean, I think there's probably a level of stress that's going on with everybody. All right, man. Well, you mentioned Bedford-Stuyvesant. That's where you reside, and of course, that's where Christopher Wallace, a.k.a. Frank White, Biggie Smalls, the best rapper of all time, in my honest opinion, died. He died on March 9th, 1997. He was a young man, shot 4 times. Only 3 of those bullets, all 4 of them, he had a chance to live there, but the bullets were bouncing around. If you read about it, it's just gross in L.A. And they never found the perpetrator. And look, I'm going to tell you, and Mitch, anybody who knows me knows how I feel about Biggie Smalls. I think he was the pioneer of the game. I loved his style. I loved how he mixed up his voice. And Rube, I got to ask you, every March 9th, this is Bedford-Stuyvesant. So Brooklyn has 3 million people strong. It's an area where it's changing. You're watching it change every day. But it's a big place. You are from where Biggie Smalls was from, inside of Brooklyn. So on March 9th, what occurs in Brooklyn? What was your first memory? You told me you met Biggie at one point in time. What goes through your head when you hear Biggie Smalls, particularly right around the anniversary of his death every year?
I mean, in Brooklyn, it's just, there's a lot of love for Big. I mean, he represented local pride. He was proud to be from Brooklyn. If you remember him getting on stage and saying, "Brooklyn, we did it." Bedford-Stuyvesant is throughout a lot of his lyrics. So there's a lot of, you'll see people walking around with their Biggie Small sweatshirts, Biggie Small T-shirts, nothing but love. People taking pictures in front of the murals. There's some small celebrations in different clubs throughout the city. It's just on the radio stations, people really understand how Big represented New York at that particular time, and he held us down, and he was the face of the city. So he was the king. He was, as they say, he was the king of New York. So my experience with Big came at being able to be a part of a concert back in '95 called Life Beat Urban Aid concert at Madison Square Garden. And, I was able to be a part of that street team working with Uptown Records. So I was close to the camp that he originally came out of, where Puff had came out of the Andre Harrell camp. So, just being in the office, cutting through with Big, hearing Big, I still to this day use some of, one of the lines that he would say when he would meet people is like, "What's up, Playboy?" So like every once in a while I'll say Playboy, and talking to one of my homeboys or something like that, because that's just my, homage to Big. But, he's just a legend, and he was bigger than life, as we talked about in a few episodes, how people can be bigger than life. And being that he's only a few years older than me, so when I listened to some of the lyrics or just the intros to some songs, to all the teachers that told me that I never amount to nothing, when he said that on Juicy, I had just came out of Brooklyn Tech High School, which is a big high school here in Brooklyn, and you felt that energy, because you could be in one of the top schools in the city, but the energy at the school, I always feel like the high school failed me. So I felt like teachers failed me. So when he said that line, it was like I resonated. I was able to feel that. And, another line that really just goes with that whole energy coming out of Brooklyn, which is, we went from ashy to classy. So
I like that.
Those are two that give me that feel. I always remember that energy that Big brought, that swagger as a big man moving around. And, he was just bigger than life. I used to love watching him wear those 5001 flavors, those leather suits and stuff those custom suits that they would put together for him. And Big will always be remembered. Street names will be a part of his legacy. And, he's just a pillar in the hip hop community.
When it comes to sex, I'm similar to the Thriller in Manila.
Yeah.
And look, just because it's Biggie's the anniversary of his death, doesn't mean this is going to be the only time we talk about him, because we're going to talk about him all the time. The 90s is going to be a foundation, a staple of this podcast. It's where Reuben is from, Brooklyn, New York. talk a lot about where we're from, and obviously Christopher Wallace, Notorious B.I.G, was from Bedford-Stuyvesant. Mitch, you got anything you want to add in about Big? I mean, I cannot say enough. We could do a whole Biggie show, but we have other things we want to talk about this evening. I mean, again, he was my favorite rapper, no question about it. Larger than life presence, mixed up his voice. The two, Ready to Die came out. Life After Death, I can remember at 12 years old buying Juicy, and then on the other side was Warning with the pager going off at the beginning.
Yeah,
and the whole album was ridiculous. And he was a young man, 24 years old. He passed away. I think a lot of people thought he was probably older than that, but he died, and they never solved the case. So every year, March 9th, and Cannabis said it, because the greatest rapper alive died on March 9th. And I think that's true, and I think it'll always be true. So, you have Tupac people, and then you have Biggie people, and some people meet in the middle. I think I definitely lean towards Big, and because that's what I grew up listening to. And as we talked about in recent shows, when Mitch was touching on East Coast, West Coast thing, I was a part of that. East Coast, I have more appreciation as I'm older for different, even some of the rappers down south and Atlanta and Chicago. But it was growing up in the '90s. It was you kind of picked a side. And,
so you picked, when you were growing up, you picked strictly East Coast? Were you just like with the East Coast
there
movement?
Was some Snoop Dogg. There was some Snoop Dogg. You had Dr.
Snoop
Dre.
was hard when he came out. Ooh.
Oh yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, Snoop. I had the Chronic with Dr. Dre, and there were some things like Scarface's from Texas, and then Busta Rhymes. I think Busta Rhymes was from Chicago. He's not New York, guys.
New York.
No, Busta's from New York.
Okay.
Busta went to high school with Big and Jay-Z. They all went to Western House.
Okay, sorry. And then you have, Andre. You have Outkast, and groups like that were huge. But yeah, primarily it was Lost Boys. You had Wu-Tang, you had Mobb Deep, you had Nas, you had Cormac, you have all these. I mean, New York, Big L, of course, Big Pun, all these guys. But it was East Coast, and then every time you heard something come from that's good, but it's not. Biggie's album is better, or that new Raekwon song, better. So it was.
But Biggie 95 was big for Big. He ruled that year. Like there was no question that he was just the man. And it was without saying, Junior Mafia, that was the clique. Yep. You wanted to be a part of that big movement, that whole bad boy movement, and being a part of the street teams that was like seeing street teams move around. Like the bad boy street team would just plaster Big stuff everywhere. They had the black windbreaker jackets on with the white lettering, and they'd be around the city just going hard, and that was that bald head movement when everybody had the bald head, and they'd just be hitting up the clubs hard, so Big ran the city. Big still you could feel his energy, especially around this time every year. And it's always good to be able to, salute a general, salute one of the main pillars in hip hop that kind of like push things forward,
I got you. I think I was thinking of Common from Chicago.
Oh, no doubt.
I liked a lot of Common. Of course, go ahead, Mitch.
No, I was gonna say that for me, like the sort of like the moment where it became clear to me just what Notorious B.I.G. meant to New York and to the people around him was when I got to New York. The reason why I came to New York was that I got a job at Daddy's House Recording Studio, which is the official recording studio of Bad Boy Records. Yeah. And at the time, this was 2002, they were working on like a number of projects that were, definitely forefront important recording industry projects at the time. Artists like Fat Joe and even Britney Spears, Mary J. Blige, Beyonce when she did Crazy in Love with Jay-Z. Like this was like a very happening time in the music industry, and Bad Boy Records and Daddy's House Recording Studio had their fingers to the pulse of all that. But meanwhile, it was like around the studio, it was like every effort was being made to exhume any recording that may not have been found up to that point of Biggie Smalls. Like, check the 2-inch reels, check the 1/2-inch reels. Let's listen to everything. Let's see if we can find something that we haven't released yet. Let's remix it. Let's get this producer. Let's get this hot new producer on it. Let's find something and reinvent it. Like, every effort to keep him alive in any way, shape, or form, that was still the priority. And this is 7 years after his death, and the whole world has moved on, into different directions musically. I mean, hip hop was going crazy. The Neptunes were banging tea kettles off of walls and making beats out of it and stuff, but they were still focusing on one thing, which was like preserving the legacy that he left behind. And as a matter of fact, in some strange twist of synchronicity, at that same time, I was sort of like doing some night shifts at a different studio down in Soho, and I would hang out there all night, getting booted with producers that didn't have names yet and just kicking it and learning tricks from people. And this dude who had just fire beats was like kind of taking me under his wing and showing me what he was working on. Turns out that this dude is Red Spider, who a lot of people don't know about. But if you listen to any of the G-Unit stuff, from when like 50 put G-Unit together, and like those first few years, a lot of the sickest beats that you'll hear from them were done by Red Spider. Anyway, lo and behold, I'm there one night, and he gets delivered this acapella of Notorious, and they're like, "Yo, we want you to do something with this," and 50, because 50 had just dropped. This is like early 2003 or like late 2003, and then a few months later, Realist Niggas comes out, and that shit is crazy. That beat is crazy. Notorious on a current track sounds like, damn, if this dude was still here right now. So
he was ahead of his time.
He was ahead of everyone's time. But anyway, my point is, I could rewind the tape back to the 90s and think back on the first times I heard, him on wax. But what it really did was hammer home just really what this man meant. Like, I would have never been able to like feel that or touch that being just a spectator on the sideline in the suburbs of Massachusetts. It was like getting into the four walls where he recorded Ready to Die, where he recorded Life After Death. I was standing in the vocal booth with the very microphone that he was rapping into in front of me. I touched it.
That's good stuff.
You was fanboying out. I hear you.
No doubt.
That's real. He was down in the trenches. Wow. Well, that's good stuff. And we're gonna talk about Biggie all the time. I mean, Rube, this is where you're from, man. BK.
Yeah.
For real.
But I think Big was, Big was universal. So, he touched those boys and from different places, and the ladies loved him. They loved him down south. They loved him in DC. When he did got down with Bone Thugs. So he had versatility. So it's not like it's just, that's the beauty of Big, that he's a Brooklyn treasure, but the world was able to, experience and share that. So that's why it's important to kind of just always salute one of the big giants of the hip hop community, and then just like
the greatest, Rube, greatest.
Just give that reverence there,
Beautiful.
So salute to the big man.
Well, he made a part of our show tonight. He made a part of the script in memory of him. Listen, let's pivot over. I want to talk about, we have two more things we're going to talk about this evening. And the next topic I want to talk to you gentlemen about is about this opioid epidemic and crisis in this country. 65,000 lives were lost in 2016. ODs, and 66% of them were opioid related. The big thing is fentanyl that's coming from Mexico now. This is something that no one is exempt from. It's happening to prominent figures. It's the addiction component here is enormous, and we could have a whole show just on this, and I'm sure we'll talk at length more about it. I mean, we know what painkillers are, and they're very addictive, obviously, right? And somebody goes in and has surgery, and they're prescribed a prescription by their doctor, and then after the prescription runs out, the body is saying, wait a minute, I want more. And I can remember outside of Boston here, Charlestown, there was OxyContin was huge, and you would hear people buzz, $60, $70 a pill. But the fact of the matter is that got hella expensive for people. So conversely, they went to heroin, which has the same exact treatment as these opiates, if you will. And now you have a crisis throughout this country. In fact, I read earlier that 130 people in the United States are dying each day, ODing, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. It's a big money business, $68.5 billion a year, including the cost of healthcare, lost productivity, addiction treatment, and the involvement with law enforcement having to pinch people. My take on this is, like, there's not enough beds in these clinics, and it's a worrisome drug, this heroin. Now, Mitch, we grew up, we dabbled in this, we dabbled in that. Heroin was never part of my stories, and thank God I never got involved with pills or any of that. Obviously, a large part of my story is alcoholism, but when you hear about these heroin addicts in our society, they're so petrified of becoming dope sick, they will go at any length to get the money to get their fix, to avoid being dope sick, which from what I gather is the flu times 20. So that could mean robbing from you, robbing from me, robbing from their grandmother, so drug use turns into the extent of the crime just keeps going up and up and up and up, because these people will do anything to get their fix on heroin. And heroin is very, very cheap. So it's coming from, God knows, Afghanistan, through Mexico. It's a huge thing, gentlemen. People are dying every day. There's and it's reckless. You're seeing needles everywhere. So I guess the question I'm going to ask you, Reuben, is what's your take on this epidemic, and how do we because let's face it, a fucking wall is not going to do anything about this heroin epidemic, and it is widespread throughout the country. What's your take on the heroin epidemic?
I've got to be real with you. My context with the impact of opiate addiction is very limited. Like, my scope is small, because in where I'm from and where I'm at, actually, even being in the court system, initially, I mean, I heard about the epidemic, but it really didn't hit. It didn't hit the black community at the same rate as it hit the white community. So much of my information initially was coming from Florida, coming out of, like you said, Massachusetts, Vermont, certain places that they were setting up these rehabs. So I actually had to start getting curious on why wasn't I hearing about it in my community when this was being, the numbers were coming out, the stats were coming out about how many people are now being found themselves challenged with this addiction. And only there was certain parts of it. And it's interesting that you mentioned that when people have surgery, that they're prescribed the painkillers or the pain medication. And the only thing that I was able to find, that there is a certain amount of institutional racism within the medical field. They have a different way, doctors or have a different way of how they actually work with the black community and how they prescribe painkillers to the people of color. And one of the ways that I was able to see that is when I started doing research, and they were saying how people of color weren't necessarily given the same amount of painkillers, or how difficult it was for them to be able to get the doctors to clear it. I had to think back to when my wife had my youngest son, Ryan, and she had a cesarean. And when she left the hospital, she was given a week's worth of pain meds. And she had, this is a serious surgery. So, of course, after 5 days of being home and the medicine was out, 6 days of being home, she had to call the doctor and say, listen, I'm still in excruciating pain. I'm still, the wound is still pretty fresh. And instead of them doing something like, hey, calling it in to the pharmacist, they called her in. We had to go to the hospital. They had to check her out. And then they were like, okay, we're going to give you another week's worth, which I understood that part. But then when I listened to stories of friends who had a little bit more access, and of course they were white, and I asked them about their experience, a friend of mine was like very liberal with his information, and he laughed and he said, well, my dentist, I had a root canal and I was able to get enough pills to last me, and they never worried about how many. No one questioned how many pills that I need. I just said I was in pain, and they gave me at least 30. And I was like, well, that's a huge difference. So I can see how maybe the pills would get into the homes. Children and different people were selling them and using them, and I could see possibly why that didn't touch the Black community so quickly. But I would love to hear from you on what is it that you're seeing, like, in the grand scheme of, like, what's the difference between this epidemic, or what are your concerns about this epidemic compared to, like, for me, what's the only thing I can compare it to is the heroin epidemic and crack epidemic that I watched and witnessed during the 80s.
Yeah, I can. Right, New York City, right? The crack cocaine was huge, but I think people were able to. That was another turned into be an expensive drug. Cocaine is expensive. Look, heroin is cheap and highly, highly addictive, and one of the big issues here is the fentanyl that it's been cut with, which is also a painkiller. Now, fentanyl is a painkiller, and police are afraid to put their fingers on it because it can kill you instantly. So it's getting cut with fentanyl. And I suppose it's to make the product better, but people are dropping left and right because they're injecting it and dying. Look, nobody wants to get dope sick. You hear it all the time at my meetings. People, drug addicts do come into AA meetings. You hear, I don't want to get dope sick, or I was dope sick. And that is the flu times 20 because you are withdrawing from this opiate. So again, you'll do anything by any means possible to get your fix. And it's in heroin, in large part, it's cheap. Like I said, the OxyContin pills they're not cheap, but the heroin is, and they both they're synonymous. They run identical with each other, and this is a huge, huge thing in this country because it's not discriminating just in Black community, and this is in rich communities. It is widespread. You got people doing it. In fact, Easton turned 5 a couple weeks ago when I was talking to somebody at Chuck E. Cheese, and they were telling me how one of the parrots they found overdosed in the bathroom at the same place the week previously while their kids were running around. So if that doesn't go to show you the extent that nobody gives a shit. Right. They don't give a shit. If you're doing fucking heroin in the middle of a Chuck E. Cheese while your kids are running around, I mean, that is beyond. It's drug addiction, but you're like a zombie with legs because you got to do it. He must have been itching while people are eating pizza and getting tickets, and he's in a stall putting a needle in his arm. And I've heard stories is that people have been in shooting galleries. That's what they're called, where you shoot up needles. It's like a room, like a poker room for heroin addicts. Everybody's sitting around trading, and so said to so and so, "Look, man, I got HIV. You don't want to use this needle." And the guy goes, "I don't care. People, I don't care. Just give me the needle. I need my fix." So if that doesn't go, just
throwing all caution to the wind. It's like, listen,
fuck it.
I gave you the heads up. I'm trying to give you the heads up on.
I don't care. Just give me the needle. So it's huge. It's big. Again, big pharma. They're similar to the government in terms of the bullshit that goes on behind the scenes with them. Big pharma. And then you have reckless doctors, Reuben, cutting prescriptions. And I'm very cognizant about when I get dental work or look. I don't want any script. I don't want any of that. You have to be conscientious about what you're taking. I'm an alcoholic. I'm an addict. So, I mean, just because I haven't dabbled in opiates yet doesn't mean I can't in the future. So you really got to be conscientious about what you're doing. I mean, I have had dental work and 30 pills come and go, and you go, damn, you know what? I got a little tingly feeling. Right. I got backed up. I was constipated as fuck. But, man, I like to be a little pain-free for a few hours. Where can I get more, Right. On and on and on and on. You hear about state troopers robbing pharmacies, and then you say to yourself, well, what? Wow, that's heavy, because these people are just not with the program, and they'll go to any length to get their fix, and that's also a very scary notion.
So do you think it's not only, I know at some point what happens is, all right, so everybody starts jumping on, we need to attack fentanyl, we need to jump on OxyContin, that's the usual, MO when there's a particular drug that becomes well known. But I guess the bigger question is, policy is it that we are just at the whim of big pharmaceutical, because every time they put something on a ban list or it becomes something that is so popular that now the drug enforcement agent has to get into it, that the pharmaceutical companies are putting out something 10 times stronger, and it's a long list of drugs on the market that you can just go pick up. So I guess one of the things that we need to also stress to our listeners is, me and Jess are just kicking the shit. We really don't have the answers, but this is just what we want to do with being able to say, like, let's think about this a little deeper. Let's remember that, if the people are listening, I don't want you to walk away from saying, hey, Rube's got all the answers. Jess has all the answers. What we're doing is just asking and inviting you into a conversation and wanting you to look a little deeper into questions and take the action in your own community, or think about it from a different perspective.
Absolutely. So, the shit hit the fan, Rube. With big pharma, and they and I think companies are more careful now, and doctors are more careful because of course, because lawsuits have occurred and people have gone to jail. You have Dr. Summeroff just writing script with his pad of paper, and people left and right. So boom, 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 boom. So now it's all right. Well, shit, we can't get those pills anymore like we used to. Dr. Summeroff is doing time with Paul Manafort. So, and he was a good doctor, and all these other squeaky clean doctors. Nobody wants to get pinched. So what do? Well, we go to the heroin, and that's which is dirt cheap. Right. Everybody has it. Same exact effect as these painkillers, and a hell of a lot cheaper. So you have a huge problem, Rube, because look, if people are going to drink, they're going to drink, right? You can't tell them, if I want to drink, I'm going to drink, Rube, right? If people are going to want to do heroin, they're going to want to do heroin, all right? And now the other topic, that is involved is, how do we, spend a lot of money with these, I have friends that are firefighters, right? And you have people that they've brought back to life with this Narcan, which is like a shot of adrenaline. And then a week later, they're sitting at the same bar with them, and the guy's buying them a beer going, hey, man, thanks for the other night, bringing me back to life.
Thanks for saving my life.
I appreciate that. And,
my union fought against being able to administer that drug because they didn't want to be on the hook. Everything's a lawsuit in New York City, And then that just puts you in a position, like you said, to get that fentanyl exposure, and you don't really want to be playing around like that. But that's it. That's a tough one. Listen, you seem like, the best thing to say about it is what? What's your takeaway? What's your takeaway from right now? If we had to say one thing about opioids, what could we just scream out to the world? You got a country that's hooked right now. You need to, and I say this all the time, I wish that Alcoholics Anonymous was in high school when I was there. A room full of wisdom, full of stories, people sharing their stories about, look, if you want to drink and fuck around, it's all cute and fine and dandy, and you playing grab ass with Lucy at the high school prom. But when you're 20, 21, this disease is going to progress. You need to educate the kids at a certain age and scare the absolute shit out of them. You got to scare the shit out of them. You got to teach them at a young age. And look, the truth is, there's not enough beds. So you do have people out there, Rube, that want the help, that can't get the help, and they, Suboxone's another thing. So there's a drug that people are taking to stay with. So it's this vicious cycle. But the question is, Rube, has it gotten too big to put a plug on it? A lot of people are out of work. There's a lot of depressed areas, so it's more prominent in certain areas. And people are sitting around shooting up heroin all day. It's huge, but I think it starts in the classroom. It starts in the school setting, and you got to give tough love and show some of these addicts, bring some of these addicts in that had it all at one point. Right. Don't have it all now because they chose to stick a needle in their arm. And you got to show, and you might have to show some film about what an overdose looks like and the ramifications attached to it. Mothers are dying, fathers are dying, leaving kids behind. It's serious shit, and the whole country's being affected by it. All right, that it's a sad topic, and I'm sure we'll touch on it a hell of a lot more this evening. I brought in a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, Rube, similar to us. We met through the fantasy football community, the football world. I brought in my boy, Matt Zozula from Las Vegas, on Twitter at Tango and Cash. Recently diagnosed
with multiple sclerosis. That's just the FBI. That's the feds kicking in the door over there.
Yeah, I was like, is that a drum roll? What do we get a drum? Was that like a?
I thought that was Elroy. I thought that was Elroy Jetson.
Oh, we had like a Foley operator over here. So
yeah, so
we're taking back to 1920s radio right here.
We bringing back hip hop, motherfucker. That's what we doing in this joint. Here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. You didn't know about this old school. Here we go.
He's gonna play some music for us.
Man, what's that? You want some Dead Prez back there? What's that?
It's like Sublime. This is Sublime shit.
This is a special treat.
Then it goes a little something like that.
All right. That was this big. You always were talking about Biggie, and I missed that part, but I threw some old school hip hop back from the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. You know what I mean?
You're our age group. You're in our age group, and we look. Hey, man, Twitter is a beautiful thing. Social media is a beautiful thing. You guys are my friends. I mean, Mitch is. I go way, way, way back with Mitch. But you two, I mean, I met you guys through social media. Football colleague of mine, Sig Bloom, called it the golden age. He's absolutely right. Reuben and I hooked up on social media. Matt, you and I consider you one of my closest friends, despite you being in Las Vegas, and we can go on talking about football for days. The reason why you're on this show tonight is not to scratch or to talk rap, but you can, and we have 1,000 times. You are... Well, let me say this. I got a lot of respect for you. You live the American dream. You have 2 children. You have a beautiful wife. And from Jump Street, when I met you 5 years ago, you have preached and touted positivity, spirituality to me. And this is something before your diagnosis. So it's interesting how this all comes into play, because recently you were diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Now, I don't know a ton other than the fact that stepfather saw it with his former wife, and it's one of these ambiguous diseases with over 200,000 cases a year are happening, and different symptoms for different people. You're a young man. You eat well. You know, again, you live the American dream. You're in Vegas, but you're not taking shots all night at Bellagio. You're not sniffing lines of cocaine off of bars. You do the right thing, and you're a skinny guy. You're in shape. You got a good complexion. I know who you are. I know what you stand for. This is an unfortunate thing that you've been diagnosed with. I wanted to ask you first and foremost, what is multiple sclerosis and what causes it?
So, what it is first of all, the immune system. A lot of people, doctors, are now finally studying the immune system. To me, it puzzles me what the American Medical Association teaches these doctors. Like you guys, I was hearing so much you guys were talking about the opioids and all that. So what now they're starting to learn more about is the immune system in the gut, right? Gut is where they call it the second brain. So 80% of your inflammation is in your gut. You have more nerves and neurons in your gut than you do your stomach, than your spine. So with multiple sclerosis, it affects the immune system. So the immune system, it attacks the myelin sheath. So if you had a copper wire, have you guys ever done any electrical work before?
Who's the handyman? I'll just say yes for the sake of
saying
yes.
Okay, so you know how
Sure.
my brother was an electrician growing up, so that's how I knew about it. Like we would just sit out in the garage and he would like strip wire or whatever, you know what I mean? And but when you imagine that the nerve, right, and you're stripping off parts of it, that's what happens with multiple sclerosis. It attacks the myelin, and it's called demyelinating of the nerve. So depending where it is, some people have, normal lives with it. It goes into remission. Some of them, depending where it is, could cause neurological issues with double vision, speech impediments, loss of function of walking, going to the bathroom, nerves. Mine was more neuropathy in the fingers, in the hands, and my stomach. That's what happened last year. I wasn't even 40 years old yet. I'm like, is this what I'm getting for my 40th birthday? You know what I mean?
Right.
But you got to have a good outlook on life. I'm telling you, if people take stuff way too serious, man, and as much as it's easy to live in fear, right? Because that's the idea of, we've been taught that from the womb. We've been taught that we fear because, you know why? Because your mother has fear, your father has fear, your sister has fear. All these people have fear, and they come to the mother, and so it starts in the womb. So, anyways, a lot of it, with my symptoms last year was about June 30th, 2018. I had sort of somebody kind of push on my back and put a push on my neck, but it wasn't their fault, right? It could have happened either way. All of a sudden, I had this really terrible kink in my right shoulder. Then my ring on my right hand, my ring finger, and my pinky finger, they got numb. Right? It didn't go down my arm though. So I'm like, all right, this is kind of weird. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to go to an acupuncturist. I'm going to have it worked on, because I've been in that alternative field for over 20 years. Okay. I do massage therapy for a living. I know more than a lot of these doctors know when it comes to actually helping people, because I've helped people numerous amounts of times in the 20 years that I've done my work in my field. So, it's interesting when you go into acupuncture. Most people, we live in a society today of instant gratification, right? So you go in, you see somebody, and you expect to be cured on the spot. Like, you could go on to iTunes, order the newest song. You could go on to Amazon, have it shipped to you in 2 hours. Right. Boom. Next thing you know, you're sending it back because you didn't try it on, right? Right. So anyway, so it's like, I'm thinking, okay, well, let me think what's going on, because what I tell my clients is the body holds grudges. Now, straight up, it's a grudge, because we are constantly having battles in the mind. It's the mental battle that will make anybody win. You see people all the time that, they say, I don't want to get up today or something, right? But anyways, I'm going off a little bit of track. So what it was I went and seen an acupuncturist, because I'm like, well, let me go see if this really would help my nerves, right? Because boom. So he did all this stuff, and then within a week, it got worse. Both of my hands went numb. My feet went numb. And then I felt like I had ants crawling all across my stomach. Oh, and I was like, this is some trippy shit, man. I mean, there's some crazy shit. So anyways, I fuck, man. I went back and seen the acupuncturist again, and he goes, to me, that's something you're going to have to go see a neurologist about. So I'm like, man, I don't like doctors, dude. I just don't like them. They don't have good bedside manners. They have a one-track mind. You take this or you don't. You know what I mean? And it's, to me, it's hard going into this, because I know it's just going to be a battle, right? And there's a lot of people that get misdiagnosed with this stuff. Yes. And that's the tricky part with this disease. There's no way they could just take blood and say you have it. So what they do is you go and get an MRI. And I've never had an MRI in my life, dude. I mean, I've had falls, bumps, and bruises. I've rolled cars over on the interstate. I've done a lot of crazy, I've done crazy stuff, but I'm still here for a reason, right? What am I here to learn, right? That's what I'm a firm believer in. Okay. So I go into I'm looking around first. It's not easy just to get into a neurologist, right? Because it takes time. It's, because insurance or whatever, they're booked out. So I told myself, my sister-in-law has dealt with some neurologists out here. And one told her she had MS, and she actually didn't have MS. So that's a whole nother story. But she went through 4 of them out here. And then eventually she found one that she felt comfortable with, the diagnosis kind of, but it's tricky. So I was like, man, and they recommended to me was one of the ones she went to, and he just doesn't have any good bedside manners. So I go, all right, there's a place called the Lou Ruvo Center in Las Vegas. It's for brain health. Okay. They do Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, anything with neurological issues, and MS, obviously. So I said, you know what? I had a feeling. I said, I want to go there, because my grandfather had MS. And, a lot of times they say it's not genetic, right? Right. But you're answering all my questions. Go ahead. Is it environmental? Who knows? We as humans, I call ourselves humans. I don't call ourselves Hispanic. I don't call myself Caucasian. I call myself a human being. right? So I address everybody as a human, right? Because that's what we are. We're all humans. Right. So anyways, so my grandpa had MS, and he was in a wheelchair in a good ladder of his life, but he lived to be 70 something. Nobody ever dies from this disease. So that's one thing they fear into you when you go and see, they fear you into you're going to end up like this, right? My path isn't the same as my grandfather's, right? Right. As much as you have that genetic code, I have a lot more books I could read today. My nutrition, I'll get into that, but meditation, and just remaining positive, right? I don't know, because he grew up during the during World War I, II. There was a lot of stresses back then too. So I think that played in a part. And then my mother, which is crazy because it's hard enough when you have one relative or sibling that has an autoimmune disease. They're called autoimmunes.
Now I was going to ask you, is MS an autoimmune disease, or is it a neurological disease?
It's an autoimmune disease, but it links to, because I said the stomach is a second brain. Yes. 80% of your immune system is in your gut. Mm-hmm. So, but these doctors won't tell you that. You go in there, your microbiome, everybody has their own chemistry. Everybody has their own DNA. Nobody's the same. Even if you have a twin, identical twin, they're not the same as you. So they're different. So the idea is it's called microbiome. You could buy all these books. You could buy all this stuff. I just bought a book today. This woman's such an inspiration. She stood up to the medical establishment, and she's a doctor herself. She's an internal medicine doctor who stood up against the doctors. But I'll get to that later. So anyways, my mom has an autoimmune disease. Okay. Scleroderma. Now, scleroderma is the hardening of an organ. So organs could be liver, kidneys, heart, and your skin. Your skin is the skin is the largest organ of the body. So what people don't realize is we're exposed to so much. But my mom, it affected her skin, and she had me at 40 years old. She was diagnosed at 30, and but nothing. I came out, and my brother and sister were adopted. But somehow the universe told me, Matt, you're coming into this life and to learn what you're going to learn, Matt. Mm-hmm. So, okay, you have to think that way, right? You can't go around thinking I'm a terrible person. Oh, go ahead.
Let me ask you this question. Please. I hear you. There's a certain part of you that I'm just automatically connecting to, because I follow the principles that Sun Tzu said, which is in the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity. Give me your perspective so that the DTPers out there that's listening, share something that you feel like, you know what, with MS, with my body of information, with my holistic approach, what would you want people to know right now that could possibly give them some hope?
Well, how about this? We are deficient. We are so deficient as a society in everything. We don't drink enough water. 70% of our body's made of water. Then you have to think about our chemistry hasn't changed in 70-something thousand years. But guess what has? Our food supply. Our food supply has been so contaminated. It's been so good. It is important. You cook as much as you can for yourself. I get it. If you got family, you're out with them, you're doing stuff. Cook as much as you can for yourself, first of all. Second of all, make time for you. Also, make sure that the food you get organic stuff, especially stuff that you're going to eat the skin, because it has so much pesticides on stuff. Right. You hope it's organic. I don't know. I wish I had my own farm and I could just go out back and pick my own cucumbers and stuff, or whatever.
Big thing what I mean? Here in Brooklyn right now. We got those. We got our own
markets and shit.
Yeah, we're doing our own farming here. So.
Oh, this is good.
Is it like urban? Is it like urban farming?
Yeah, that's what we're trying our best here. So
I love it.
Well,
I love it.
It's about that brings people together too, because when somebody comes together and they say, "Oh, I don't like that person because they don't speak my language or whatever." But I say, but you know what? What together is when you deal with somebody that has a sickness, whether it's MS, lupus, All these autoimmune diseases are starting to pop up. Actually, a big one is Lyme disease. They can't even really figure that out for a lot of people too. And who's to say I don't have Lyme disease? I don't know. But what they look for on the MRI machine is the lesions on your throughout your brain and your spine. So that's they found lesions on my brain and also on my neck on C2, C3. Now the problem is they don't know where those nerves go. Your brain, you only use 7% of your brain. So I did have a follow-up recently for my MRI. And I was hoping, like, oh, the lesion's going to go down or just stable, right? But you can't live it. They don't even know what these drugs they want to give you. They can't, it doesn't cure anything. It doesn't repair the myelin, and it doesn't actually stop it. All they're trying to do is trick your body from not attacking yourself. But the problem is a lot of these drugs have side effects.
Okay.
And there's just numerous amounts of side effects, right? But the problem is you get on one, then the problem is you say you get off that one, that doesn't work. They want you to get on another one. So now you're going down these different rabbit holes of really opening yourself up. So I refuse the drugs, dude. I just refuse the drugs. It's just my belief. It's what I feel in my soul right now.
Okay.
Because there's studies that are done that of people that have done the drugs for 10 years and people that have not done the drugs for 10 years. And they both, whether it's been progressive or not, they both progress the same.
So Matt, I want to try to just get one last thing in there before we wrap it up. I need to get a little sense of how are you able to be like Jess talked about you in such a glowing way. He was telling me like my boy is like high on life. He keeps me pumped up. You have inspired him in many ways, like just talking to Jess a lot about you. Who's your support system? What do you think about what it is to keep your mind as powerful it is to keep your body in tune with what you're trying to do and how you're going to continue to try to be as positive as you can be? Who's supporting you and how important is that support?
Well, I have 2 kids, I have a son and daughter, and I have a wife. I have a wife of 13 years. We're together 13 years. And, they support me a lot. They do, but it's a lot of fear too, because, when you have a significant other, they watch videos and see people walking differently and things like Selma Blair just came out. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's an actress.
I am.
Yeah. And she's had symptoms for the last 15 years. And if you watch the video, it's very emotional. She has a hard time talking and she's wobbling with the cane.
Yeah.
I have her family as well, but it's mainly my wife and the 2 kids. But it's tricky because nobody knows what you go through until you go through it, right? Because one person say they could go through something, another person can't. But the bottom line is they're very supportive, and they get worried like anybody would. But that's who my main support is.
What did FDR say? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Look, we appreciate you coming on the show.
Yeah, for sure,
tonight.
man. I mean, I could have rambled forever, but there's one more saying. One more saying. It goes. Fear is the mind killer. So what you have to remind yourself is to live in the moment. The past is gone. The past is so gone that you want to beat yourself up over an ex relationship or a house you should have bought when the market went up. It was at the low, but live in the present moment, because this is what it is. Because everything you learned up to this moment is here. So what has it taught you? And guess what? The future is an illusion, man. It's never, ever been even created yet. Right. But you make it what it is. And that's why I say just you remain positive, eat right as best as you can, because, we're all here to learn something, man. And I'm just going to take it one day at a time. And that's all we could do.
Right. Matt, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your story. I appreciate you dropping that last piece. That piece, I think of everything that you said. For me, that just gave me goosebumps, because that's basically what I feel like I wanted to do with Disturbing the Peace, which is just live in that moment, be present, understand that if I could take something from my mind and make it a reality and make it tangible, that's as the realest thing possible, and to love my family every single day. So, thank you for sharing that, because that's what I think is the biggest message that we want to get across to everybody every single day. We're going to run down some news. We're going to hit you with hip hop. We're going to give you some good tips from my brother Mitch, who's coming up right now. But in the end, what we really want you to walk away with is that this is just an intimate conversation that hopefully is going to be good to your soul, and maybe just give you a little bit of information to think about, and also set you up for the rest of the week until you get back to us.
Absolutely. And, we wrap every show up with the health beat with our boy, Mitchell Hurd, the fitness professional and nutritional expert of the podcast, and most importantly, the executive producer. Mitch, what do you got? What do you got this week? It fits in nicely with a lot of the spiritual stuff that Matt was talking about, because, what I grabbed from Matt was, despite being kicked, with what he got for his 40th birthday, he's on the road to doing better, and he's not going to let this overtake him. He's going to eat right. He's going to keep a clear head one day at a time, and I can value that a lot. So what do you got going on this week, Mitch?
All right, cool, thanks. Yeah, today on the Health Beat, we are talking all about stretching. The big question is, do you stretch before or after the workout? The answer is yes to both, but there's a kind of stretching you're going to want to do before your workout that isn't the same kind that you might do after the workout. Before you work out, you're going to want to use a form of stretching known as dynamic stretching. What this means is that you're basically going to mimic the activities of your workout in a very light, low-intensity manner. If you're working on lower body exercises, then just some body weight squats or some squats against the wall with a stability ball on your back is going to stretch your hips, knees, and ankles through the range of motion that you will be going through when you're doing your squats or deadlifts or lunges, but it's doing it at a low intensity, so you're less likely to strain something or tear something. It just gets the joints ready for that movement and the muscles ready for the demands of that exercise in terms of how much they're going to need to stretch and then recontract to do the movement. So that's an example for, let's say a lower body workout. If I were going to do an upper body workout and do some chest presses and some shoulder presses, maybe I might warm up with some dynamic stretching in the form of just a push-up. A basic bodyweight push-up is like a bench press, but it's just some percentage of my body weight, and I'm just moving in and out of that range of motion through my shoulder joint and elbow joint and wrists at a low intensity. So I'm getting those joints and those muscles ready for benching, whether it's barbell, dumbbell, machine press, anything like that. But those high intensity exercises, when my body sees those, they've already kind of gotten the glimpse of that with the push-up. So when it comes to stretching before the workout, that's where your dynamic stretching is going to come in handy. And after the workout, if you want to get into a deep stretch, a deep static stretch of any given muscle and hold it for 60 or 90 seconds, that's definitely good to reduce the soreness that you might experience from the workout. Overall, just lengthen that muscle and build in deeper ranges of motion for the future. But coming before the workout, that's just going to put your muscles to sleep and really be counterproductive and possibly even increase your chances for injury. And
so some quick dynamic stretching, Mitch, is like karaoke, right? Because my son is in the lacrosse. He does the karaokes, he does the Spider-Mans and the inchworms. With those, are those things that I should continue to work with him on so that he can be as flexible as possible, as well as work out his muscles before he gets into his actual workout?
Yeah, absolutely. Because of the reasons I mentioned, it's going to help prevent injury because it's firing up those pathways and getting the joints and muscles ready for what he's about to do within the sport or activity. And it's stretching his calves, it's stretching his hamstrings and his hip flexors when he's doing the crossover step of the karaoke, or he's doing the toe touch of the inchworm, or he's doing, any of like the lizard crawls where you're stepping your hands outside of your feet. You're getting a stretch for a moment, but then you're bringing it back from where it came right after it. So it's just like a little bit more of a ballistic is a sort of a misnomer, and that's like some other branch of stretching, but it's more ballistic than it is static. You're bouncing into it and you're coming out of it in a controlled sort of slow way that will be sped up within the sport activity. So the answer to your question is yes, those are For sure.
So I'll be having Ryan come through for his appointment about Thursday or something like that. We'll try to set up an appointment with you.
Oh,
I used to do some karaoke back in the day, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Karaoke. I get on the microphone and I'm nice with karaoke. But
that's it. Episode 5, boys. This was good. And hey, might have a midweek special. Last week we had a midweek special. Good stuff. Really good stuff. I hope everybody learned. You know, we want you to love and pick something up from every show. Because, you know, like I said, I go to my meetings, my AA meetings. I don't agree with everything that's being talked about all the time. And but if I take a slice of something from every single meeting, then eventually I'll have an artillery and an arsenal of, weaponry of wisdom. And that's the goal that we're going to try to, put out every single episode.
Yo, listen, this was DTP, Disturbing the Peace, for my boy Justin Lanero, executive producer, Mitch Hurd, Reuben Stanford. See you next week.
Yeah, boy.